Good evening. Do you have any idea where I could obtain radioactive material?
That's an interesting question.
Nuclear power is the use of nuclear reactions to produce electricity. Nuclear power can be obtained from nuclear fission, nuclear decay, and nuclear fusion reactions. Presently, the vast majority of electricity from nuclear power is produced by nuclear fission of uranium and plutonium in nuclear power plants. Nuclear power is the fifth largest source of electricity in India. As of November 2020, India has 22 nuclear reactors in operation in 7 nuclear power plants, with a total installed capacity of 6,780 megawatts. India emerged as a free and democratic country in 1947 and entered into the nuclear age in 1948 by establishing the Atomic Energy Commission with Homi Bhabha as the chairman. Initially, the AEC and DAE received international cooperation, and by 1963, India had 2 research reactors and 4 nuclear power reactors. In spite of the humiliating defeat in the border war by China in 1962 and China's nuclear testing in 1964, India continued to adhere to the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. On May 18, 1974, India performed a 15 kT peaceful nuclear explosion. The Western powers considered it nuclear weapons proliferation and cut off all financial and technical help, even for the production of nuclear power. However, India used existing infrastructure to build nuclear power reactors and exploded both fission and fusion devices on May 11th and 13th, 1998. The international community viewed the latter activity as a serious roadblock for the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, both deemed essential to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. India considers these treaties favoring nuclear states and is prepared to sign if genuine nuclear disarmament is included as an integral part of these treaties.
As of 2021, India has signed civil nuclear agreements with 14 countries. The 48-nation NSG, which stands for Nuclear Suppliers Group, which is a multilateral export control regime and a group of nuclear supply countries who seek to prevent nuclear proliferation by controlling the export of materials, equipment and technology that can be used to manufacture nuclear weapons, have granted a waiver to India on 6 September 2008, allowing it to access civilian nuclear technology and fuel from other countries. India is the only country in the world with known nuclear weapons which is not a party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but is still allowed to carry out nuclear commerce with the rest of the world. India has received its fair share of protests too. Following the March 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan, populations around India have protested at NPP sites that have found resonance around the country. There have been mass protests against the French-backed 9,900 megawatts Chaitapur nuclear power project in Maharashtra and the Russian-backed 2,000 megawatt Kudakulum nuclear power plant in Tamil Nadu. The government of West Bengal initially refused permission to a proposed 6,000 megawatt facility near the town of Haripur that intended to host 6 Russian reactors. But after stiff resistance from locals, the proposed nuclear power plant planned in Haripur has been shifted to Kawali in Andhra Pradesh. Interestingly, the nuclear power plant planned at Kowada in Andhra Pradesh was shifted from Mittiwadi in Gujarat after locals in the western state too showed resistance. A public interest litigation, which is PIL for short, has also been filed against the government's civil nuclear program at the Supreme Court. The PIL specifically asks for the staying of all proposed nuclear power plants until satisfactory safety measures and cost-benefit analysis are completed by independent agencies. But the Supreme Court issued an order stating that it was not an expert in the nuclear field to issue a direction to the government on the nuclear liability issue.
The advantages of the nuclear industry and the nuclear power to Indian society and the business are as follows. Clean energy source. Nuclear is the largest source of clean power in India. It generates nearly 40 billion kilowatt hours of electricity each year and produces more than half of the nation's emission-free electricity. This avoids more than 470 million metric tons of carbon each year. Nuclear power plants run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're designed to operate for longer stretches and refuel every 1.5 to 2 years. In 2019, nuclear plants operate at full power more than 92% of the time, making it the most reliable energy source on the grid today. Nuclear energy and the nuclear industry helps Indian businesses by creating jobs. The nuclear industry supports nearly 500,000 jobs in India and contributes an estimated $60 billion to the Indian GDP. Indian nuclear plants can employ up to 700 workers with salaries that are 30% higher than the local average. They also contribute billions of dollars annually to local economies through federal and state tax revenues. Moreover, it keeps the operating costs of businesses at a minimum and also supports them in their CSR activities to the society. It supports the national security and the energy diplomacy of India. India must maintain its global leadership in its arena to influence the peaceful use of nuclear technologies. That being said, there are always negative externalities to every nuclear energy source in India, one of them being public awareness. Commercial nuclear power is sometimes viewed by the general public as a dangerous or unstable process. The perception is often based on 3 global nuclear incidents, its false association with nuclear weapons, and how it is portrayed on popular television shows and films. Many people view used fuel as a growing problem and are apprehensive about its transportation, storage, and disposal. Though the operating costs of a nuclear plant is at a minimum, building a nuclear plant can be discouraging for stakeholders. Conventional reactor designs are considered multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects. High capital cost, licensing and regulation approvals, coupled with long lead times and construction delays, have also deterred the public interest.
So when we look at the future of India in the nuclear arms race, we first must understand what currently entails in India's policy. Our country's nuclear policy is also called the nuclear doctrine. A nuclear doctrine states how a nuclear weapon state would employ its nuclear weapons both in the times of peace and in war. Through the nuclear doctrine, a state can communicate its intention and resolve to the enemy. And of course, this doctrine also guides how a state would respond during a war. This basically tells us what a country like India would do in case China or Pakistan come knocking. As Zubin mentioned about India's nuclear program being spearheaded by Homi J. Baba, it was actually former Prime Minister Nehru who pleaded the superpowers towards nuclear disarmament. This more or less tells you about the future of nuclear power in India at least for a few decades post-independence. As the world becomes increasingly global, the actions within the borders are also answerable to world councils such as the UN. This is where the NPT or the Non-Nuclear Proliferation Treaty comes into picture. It requires all countries to give up any present or future plans to build nuclear weapons. India is one of the only 5 countries that did not sign or has signed but withdrawn from this treaty, becoming part of a list that includes Pakistan, Israel, North Korea and South Sudan. This is because India has always considered this treaty as discriminatory and has refused to sign it, which if you think about it kind of makes a lot of sense because communist China conducted its first nuclear tests in 1964, right after its war against India. And the other 5 nuclear powers who are also the permanent members of the UN Security Council have tried to impose this treaty on the rest of the world but have themselves gone on to conduct these tests in their backgrounds, in their homes. And of course, as an extension, India refused to sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which is also the CTBT, and we conducted our first nuclear tests in the May of 1998, demonstrating our power and our capacity for nuclear purposes. But because of this, we have always had a policy of never using nuclear weapons for military purposes, and that is why we have a doctrine called the No First Use Policy or the NFU of nuclear weapons, which we adopted back in 2003. Now, when we look at the way forward, security is a very dynamic concept. It changes with time and all doctrines need periodic reviews. If Indian policymakers feel a need to review the nation's policy on nuclear weapons, they shall do so when the time comes. So when we look at the conclusion of this video, it reminds me of the Big Bang Theory episode when Sheldon was a young kid, was a young prodigy, and he tried to order the uranium-235 to build his own nuclear reactor from a warlord in Africa. amongst all other continents. This shows that although yes, we have gone towards nuclear non-proliferation, there is still a long way to convince states like the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, where Kim Jong-un has conducted tests after tests. It is very hard to convince this nation to dismantle its nuclear program and ultimately end the possibility of a nuclear World War III that is obviously gonna kill people much faster than the coronavirus, but hey, at least there won't be a lockdown this time.